And the windows keep opening and closing really quickly, so like you gotta, we screwed up. I can't remember if it was like pickup trucks. I think it was pickup trucks. We're just trying to, we had to buy like feels like exploration. Something like that. You can't even like that to 50.
All right, right at 6 o'clock, Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the study session, November 8th, 2022. Donna, will you do a roll call, please?
I will. Councilmember Bode.
Here.
Councilmember Sherman. Here. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
Mayor Nesco.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Schmidt.
Here.
Councilmember McDowell.
Present.
And Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
Community and Economic Development Director Jay Hill has information for us about land use regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. It's a riveting subject. My plan tonight is to kind of start at the 30,000-foot view and kind of crash until we're skimming across the top of the weeds, but not really getting into them. If we have more questions, I'm happy to take them as the presentation goes on or at the end, either way. So thank you for being here tonight. We're going to talk generally about just kind of planning. How does it work and how is it going to work over the next couple of years here in Shelton? And part of that is due to kind of the planning hierarchy of laws. So a lot of what we do is enabled at the state level. We have the State Environmental Policy Act, the Growth Management Act, the Shoreline Management Act, a whole bunch of regulations. There's more, the Coordinated Water System Planning Act, keeps going on and on and on. So a lot of what we do is governed or constrained or required or requested or strongly suggested by the state. And then that starts to filter down to the local level through other kinds of tools that are implemented. So there are often county-wide planning policies within the county comprehensive plans, and those are usually worked out in agreement between the cities and the counties. And then each of the comprehensive plans themselves contain further sub-plans usually. There are functional plans which are adopted as elements of the comprehensive plan. So previously you guys have talked about the water and sewer comprehensive plans that are underway. There's the parks, recreation, and open space plan. These fundamental sub-elements that go into the comprehensive plan and become part of it. And so the comp plan itself, when we're talking about our efforts to revise our comp plan, the periodic update is what they call. That is not necessarily the entirety of the document, but kind of the framework that goes into it and setting the expectation for these future revisions of these other functional sub-area plans. And then after we've gone through kind of the hierarchy, the higher level kinds of documents, plans, policies, laws, then we implement that through our zoning code. So we say, this is the kind of community we want to see. This is how we're going to get there by creating these ordinances, these standards, these requirements for development, for environmental protection, for health, housing, safety, and so on and so on. And I say zoning code, some of the stuff will come through the municipal code as well. It's not all entirely within our Title 17 or 1920, any of our subdivision ordinances, things like that. There are, for example, like multifamily tax exemptions, which are authorized under the state, usually come in under like the financial chapters of communities documents. So I say zoning code, but I really kind of refer to the municipal code, but the zoning code is where the bulk of it will land. And within that zoning code, we have our development standards, we have our policies and procedures for how we review and interpret applications and so on. And then that eventually translates into the project level plans and entitlements. So when people are out there building in accordance with the regulations that the royal we, but the collective you have established for our community, they are implementing our comprehensive plan. And so it's important to remember as we're building these that we want something that is easy to understand and very easy to implement, because then the work gets done for us. So what I call the local planning cycle, it starts with revision to the comprehensive plan, and we start with allocating growth targets in some more like urban jurisdictions like King County, Pierce County, so on. They have a very specific process for going through growth targets and buildable lands and things like that. Ours is a little less formal, but basically the summary of what we need to do is figure out what our growth is going to look like. What is the trend line, up, down, sideways, so on. How much land do we have for various uses within our community? Do we have the infrastructure necessary to support the growth the land, the uses, all those things that we've identified. And then we create policies to implement that development and to help further that development along. And so that takes about 2 years to kind of start from the scoping process and identifying, what do we want our community to be? What's the vision for the plan? What's the vision for the community? And then translating that into this policy development document. And then we go into the implementation phase of that, which is the zoning code revision. So we start with a code audit where we go through our code. We look at it for what matches with our comprehensive plan, what matches with existing state laws that we need to catch up to, so on and so on. And we create policy consistency between the state policies, our comprehensive plan, and then our zoning code. We draft the code and then we implement the code through a series of ordinances which come to you folks. And then eventually we get to projects, and those projects usually come in 2 forms. There's public infrastructure, which is our water towers, our pipes, our sewers, so on and so on. And then the development, which is utilizing that to help future or further the goals that we've established in the plan. And so it kind of looks like an arrow here, but it's more like a circle. It comes back to comp plan revision. We're required by law to update them every 10 years. That's been recently changed. It was 8 years. They used to be due in June. Now they're due in December. So December 2025 is going to be the deadline for our plan to be fully adopted through council and reviewed by the State Department of Commerce and so on. So I would like to have it done by the summer to early fall of 2025. That way we've got time to get it through the review processes and we're not bumping up against any deadlines. And so that process, like I said, it's a 2-year program and it's going to start soon. I'm going to be coming here probably sometime after the start of the new year with an outreach plan and kind of a scoping plan, like how are we going to do this and how are we going to make sure that we have the community input and the kinds of community input from the people that we definitely want to hear from. We want to reach out to people who maybe haven't historically participated in the process and people who may have great ideas. A big thing lately has been reaching out to school students and getting involved with like AP government classes or civics classes and things like that, and getting them involved in creating even sometimes like a youth steering council to help guide some of these things that are youth issues. We're talking about a 10-year plan duration and 20 to 30 years of development that comes out of it. A lot of them are going to be Sheltonites that are going to be sitting at this table later on. And so, this gives them a real opportunity to invest in a plan that is investing in their future. So that's something, just one of the things that I'll be wanting to bring forward. And then also the code, the state law allows for an annual docketing process. So if we create a comp plan and we need to make some tweaks to it later, or people come to us asking for tweaks, there's always the option to do this mid-cycle review. And somebody comes and submits a comp plan amendment application, and we bring that through the process, through staff to the council, and they can request an amendment. We can also make our own amendments if we find that we
Who are
need
they?
something. Developers, typically, maybe, there could be activist groups who want to, see more environmental protection. There could be a, negotiated settlement with like a tribal partner or a county entity or something like that affects how we do business and affects something within the comprehensive plan. So there's always those opportunities. Well, I've worked in other jurisdictions where the docket process was substantial. In the city of Redmond, the annual docket was akin to running a comprehensive plan process every 2 years. And so it was very extensive. I don't know to the extent that that's been used here, but I don't think it has. So, but it's always an option that we have. So we can say, well, we did this, we liked it, but we just need to make some tweaks to it to make it meaningful in the way that we intended. Maybe pointing it at the right place, or no, sorry. I'll just go. Okay, so like I said, required every 10 years for a comprehensive plan. We're due at the end of 2025. There are required elements, land use, housing, capital facilities, utilities, so on and so on. We can also, if we're interested in something, make our own element. And I can't say what that would be necessarily, but if somebody wanted I don't know, a waterfront specific set of policies, and they really wanted to buckle it into one element that didn't really, maybe it transcended a couple of different chapters or something. I'm just making spitballing right now, but you could create your own element that was representative of the factors that you consider important to your community. And like I said before, this guides the development of the code. And so the code implements the comp plan, and we also use policies and interpretations to supplement the code language. For example, when an ordinance gets passed, you folks tell us, this is what we want the outcome to be. And then it's usually on staff to develop the application process or the application materials and interpret how things are reviewed and approved. And there's a whole set of ways to do appeals and things like that. But generally speaking, it's set in code, and then we interpret that code as best we can to affect the intent of the comp plan. This is harder to see down here than it was on my screen, but I apologize. But striking a balance. We want flexibility in our code. We want people to be actualized. People want to come in and try something innovative and try something new and build a real natural kind of feel to a community. So we want, things that can be done through agreements and through, that will achieve creativity and variety. But also we want consistency, because we don't want to have every developer get treated differently or every property owner get treated differently. We don't want, somebody to get their permits in 14 days and somebody to get theirs in 120 days for the same type of application. We want consistency in our standards, in our review times, in our processes, so on and so on. And that's fair, not only fair, but it's also, a constitutional obligation. We have to follow due process. And so we do our best to make sure that we hold the line as close as we can to the code that has been created, but also making sometimes favorable interpretations to achieve a certain outcome if that, if it's legally defensible to do so. And we have, the attorneys weigh in, and we have, a body of land use resources and lots of professional experience within our department to try to make sure that we are making the right decision for the community. It shouldn't always come down to code says this, that's the end. It can be, but in very specific cases, we should try to do what we can to achieve a better outcome. And like I said before, if we've created a piece of code, it's not working, we've created something in the comprehensive plan, it doesn't work for that particular site or that particular property, we have the ability to go back and revise. I would love to get it right the first try. Let's aim for that, because it saves everybody time and effort. But if we need to fix something, we can go back and do that. So the project level entitlements, these are the application of the code processes and a realization of the comp plan vision. And this is all of the things that some of you may be more familiar with, the building permits and site plan development, some of the things like development agreements, which we don't use very often here, but we can. PUDs, planned unit developments, which we're currently working with our code advisory committee to revise and make more useful and more clear and consistent. And so those entitlements by the developers and by the property owners are what is furthering the goal of our community. So you won't see this in our code currently, but it is my hope that you will see it soon. So we have 4 general types of applications, and I want to break them out within our code and be very clear on how the process works for each application type. Instead of, if you look at our code currently, we have a lot of the process information in each application type. So you have to go to the conditional use permit application to see all of the details on how that works. And it works very similarly to a variance, but the variance has its own little quirks and whatever. And so I want to streamline all of that. So they're handled in generally the same way, same noticing deadlines, same processes for review and posting and things like that. And that way, there's consistency, there's expectations by people who are developing and improving their properties and whatnot, that there's, just this consistency in the process. I want you to be able to set your watch by it. Like we have the Permit Streamlining Act, which requires us to have a thumbs up or thumbs down on a project from 120 days after the notice of completion. So if somebody has a complete product or project application and they have submitted all of the materials required by our code, state law, whatever, we have 120 days from that date that it was a complete application to get that decision handed back. And so making sure that our application processes are as streamlined as possible to avoid any internal churn, to avoid back and forth with the applicant, to all of that kind of stuff. We want to approve legal and conforming applications, but we want to do so quickly. So we start with administrative ministerial, those are the type 1 applications. Those are ones, they're a building permit. There's not really conditions to it. That's pretty standard. You come in across the counter, you get that particular application. Just there's no discussion, no public notice, no anything. It's just, that is a very, very simple type of application. Then the next type is a little bit more difficult. That's the administrative discretionary. These are ones that often under state law, we have some kind of noticing requirement, or we have SEPA or something like that, where we have a deeper level of review and compliance that's required. Again, these are administrative. These are usually handled at the staff level, meaning myself or one of our staff will be the one that handles that. Type 3 is quasi judicial. These are our hearings examiner applications, and those include like preliminary plats. And I have a list of all the different types of applications on the next slide. And then the last one is legislative. And those are the things that come to you. Those are the big policy setting kinds of ones: comp plans, rezones, currently special use permits, which we'll also talk about, and then a couple of other ones. So this slide, you might be able to see on your computers. If you're looking at them, it may be very difficult to see because we have a lot of application types. And again, like a lot of these are required by varying components of state law, our code implementing state law, so on and so on. So we have to have these types of applications. But you can see everything from address requesting and FEMA elevation certificates and sign permits. Those are all ministerial. If you meet our code requirements, pretty standard, just happens. The administrative discretionary, those are, like you can see, more like the shoreline kinds of things, SEPA determinations, things that require a little bit more review. You'll see I have two things highlighted in green here. One is a minor variance under administrative discretionary, and one is a rezone implementing the comp plan under quasi judicial. The green ones are things that we don't have currently that we would like to see implemented over the next couple of years, whether that comes along before the comp plan, with the comp plan, or after the comp plan. We want to get these in. A minor variance would be, because of my site condition or because of the way my house was built, I can't build my garage without going into my setback 1 foot, and instead of saying, no, you can't build anything because 1 foot is a bridge too far, we can say, well, if you meet these standards, you're not blocking anybody's view, you're not emitting any toxic or noxious fumes. I made a word there. If you're not doing those things, then perhaps you can be granted a minor variance in that kind of a situation. And I've worked in a lot of jurisdictions where there was a minor variance process, and it was very useful. And you send postcards to the neighbors, and most people don't really care. They're like, oh, somebody wants to build a shed, I'm okay with that, And so the other one is the rezones implementing the comp plan. So the future land use map of the comprehensive plan is where we want to be in the future. And it's my recommendation in the future that we have this future land use map and we allow people to rezone their properties in accordance with the comp plan as it becomes an appropriate time for them to do so, instead of us just getting done with the comp plan and then being like, all right, we're just going to rezone the whole city and see what happens. It'll be chaos, dogs and cats living together, like that kind of stuff. Like it'll be, it's not a situation that we want to get into. But right now, if somebody wants to come in and make a rezone that would be in accordance with our new comprehensive plan, they would have to come all the way to council, this body, and go through the legislative process to do what we already asked them to do. And I feel like that's kind of onerous and not the greatest of governance. Now, that being said, it's not my decision to make. I'm going to make the suggestion to you guys later more formally in the form of an ordinance. And hopefully we'll have that opportunity to have that discussion. But I think if people are doing something that we have asked them to do, we should be supporting that and making it as easy as possible. The last thing that I have highlighted, I mentioned in the type 4 legislative permits or legislative, we'll call them applications. Those are the big kinds of like council decisions, the really policy setting decisions. We have a whole thing called special use permits, and I'm not 100%, like versed on what it all includes, but it requires the special use permits to be approved here after being heard by the hearing examiner, with the hearings examiner making a recommendation to the council, even though it's a permit very similar to the conditional use permits that would have been approved quasi judicially by the hearings examiner. So I feel like it's an extra step. And Jeff and I have talked about this, and we hope that, when the time comes as well, we'll bring an ordinance forward and ask for the permission to, move that back to a type 3 kind of application. Just let the hearings examiner make that kind of a decision in accordance with all of the proper noticing and, the state guidelines and all that kind of stuff. Yes.
I have a question. The minor variance, we don't have that in place. 'Cause I'm thinking of that You know, the house up on the hill, Eric, you remember a few years ago, where the guy wanted to build the slope? Remember? You don't, do you remember that?
I remember,
And
I'm not
I-
sure if it's the same one, but go ahead.
And I thought we had them. We just case by case on that.
In some cases, and we should not be, as Jay's been talking about, we want to be clear, consistent, apply the same rules to everybody when they come in so that there is an expectation of what you will receive if you meet the permit requirements. But the minor variance, as Jay said, I've seen it work well in other places, and usually you tie it to a numerical standard. So you say if you need a variance of 20% or less of the numerical standard, then it's administrative. People in the general area are still notified, and there is an opportunity to move into a more robust process if there's objections to it. But typically, it's very similar to what Jay said. You got a 5-foot setback. You don't have enough room for the separations between your house and your property line to get that shed in that 5 feet, but you need 1 additional foot. Most people are going to be okay with that, and there's no. It's not necessary unless there's an objection in my mind for it to go to a public hearing. Things like that, but they're minor. They're not anything that's major at all.
Any other questions here before I move on? Okay, great. So our application process right now it's pretty much the same type of application process as you would have in any other jurisdiction that does planning across the Western US. We have application intake where, often we've met with people for more complex projects. We meet with people in advance to try to help them with level setting and project design and things like that. Otherwise, we are willing to take in an application from anybody, whether we've had a pre-sub or not. And then at that point, it gets routed out to the various departments for their review, typically planning, public works. And we'll be looking for, adherence to the zoning codes, will be adherence to the stormwater standards, all the different things. We develop a bunch of comment letters and pull them all together. And then we, during the time that we're doing that review, we do our SEPA noticing. And then we issue any required notices, posting notices on site for certain applications, or posting in the paper if that's required, so on and so on. Some of our decisions have to be posted with Ecology or Department of Commerce. It just depends on the myriad of project types that we have to deal with on a regular basis. If I were to make a flow chart of everything, it would be dizzying and is dizzying. And then we come to our decision. And then after the decision, if there is an aggrieved party, whether that's the applicant didn't get the outcome that they wanted, or an adjoining property owner or interested party or whatnot that also didn't get an outcome that they were looking for, then there's the whole appeal process through the hearings examiner, through Superior Court. Depends on the type of application, but there's a variety of ways of appeal, again, in interest of keeping people's due process rights. I'm gonna hit it again because it jumps on me. God, there we go. It's mocking me. Donna's probably playing jokes on me right there. So general review timeframes for our type 2 to type 4 processes. So again, the ministerial ones, those are, people come in, we can do them, sometimes do them across the counter. Sometimes it takes a few days, but they don't have the same level of review because we don't have to do SEPA or public noticing or things like that. So this is for the type 2 to type 4 processes. And really, there's a whole bunch of exceptions for the type 4 processes. Like if somebody comes in for a comprehensive plan update or amendment request, and we have a docketing process, we don't have to immediately process that. We can tell them to wait until the next docket and so on. I mean, so there's different exceptions to some of these rules, and those are laid out in state code. But generally speaking, somebody brings us an application, we have 28 days to tell them your application is complete or your application is deficient, it's missing these items, please resubmit. As soon as they resubmit, we get another 28 days to review. Everybody looks over it again, compares the previous comments to the new submittal, says, okay, this is good, this is complete, this can move on through the process. At that point, we notice. The notice also wildly depends. 14 days is kind of standard. Some shoreline permits require either 21 or 30 days, and it really depends on the exact specific type of the application. I have to constantly go back and look into the book to make sure I'm doing exactly the right one, because I never want to get so complacent that I'm like, yeah, it's 21 days, and then totally mess it up for the applicant. Like, so I'm very, very by the book when it comes to that, to make sure that we're making sure that the applicant's investment in their architecture and their permit fees and everything is being well protected. And then, like I said, for these, generally, we have to have the 120 days from the notice of complete application. So
can you mention after they get the notice of completion, a little bit about vesting?
about the vesting?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so at the time that applications are noticed as complete, they are, as Jeff just mentioned, considered vested under the law. So whatever application standards were in place on the day that they received that application, or that we issued the completeness notice, they're in there, they're locked in. So we have to be very careful to make sure that we do our review very well within that 28 days. And it doesn't mean that we have to review the project for all of its compliance with the code, or that it's a good project or anything like that. We just need to make sure it is complete, because once it's complete, it's locked in and they use whatever standards. And so if those standards change, if we adopt a new building code, if we make a comprehensive plan rezone, if we do changes to the local stormwater manual or the local shoreline management program, in that time, they're vested under the old one. And so it's important to make sure that we very clearly identify the date, because some of these projects can go on for years and years and years, and it can come back to what day were they vested, what application standards were they applied under. In some cases, it's beneficial for the applicant to withdraw and resubmit. Maybe something became more lenient or easier, or there's new flexibility under state law, or there's a new program that they want to apply for, so on and so on. Generally speaking, people want to vest because standards usually don't get easier over time, but sometimes they do. Or sometimes, like I said, when the multifamily tax exemption program came out under state law, a lot of people wanted to take advantage of that, and they didn't care if they were vested. They wanted a new application that they could get the MFT under. So, things like that. Any other highlights that you want me to hit?
No, I think the other thing that I would mention is be very careful about code changes and how often you change the code, because if you're looking back 5 versions beyond, if you change the code 5 times between when a project submits building permits and it's been vested, it's very difficult to kind of figure out which regulations applied to this project because it was vested on this date when you go back through all the versions. So it's important to kind of consider those holistically and do it once a year, maybe, with code changes and code revisions.
Is this document, this comp plan, where we would address affordable housing, workforce housing for the future?
We very well can. You're not required to use that as your only avenue, but there is a required housing element, and that one's required by the state. And that's where most people do address their affordable housing policies and setting up kind of the standards for what they want to see. That's one way you could do it. You could, as long as it's not in violation of the existing comp plan, you can create your own affordable housing policies and codes and things like that. Now you could amend the comp plan under the annual docket to do that kind of thing. There's a lot of ways to do that, functional plans, so on and so on. Since we have this opportunity with the comp plan coming up, and since we Mason County just had their housing needs assessment done, and since we're hopefully going to be sharing some resources with the county, I do think it's a great time to address that as a community. Some of the things we can get out in front of, like for example, if the council wanted to adopt a multifamily tax exemption program, barring some changes we might need to make to our downtown zoning to allow for something like that, but we could effect an ordinance and have that program within the next year, or even before the comp plan, if that was something you guys were interested in. So there's always the ability to get out in front of the plan, or we can let the plan drive the process, either way that you guys want to go.
Yeah, because I think you and I were talking at the barbecue about big developments coming in with hundreds of homes and having a percentage be affordable, or
Yes, that's called mandatory inclusionary, and we can set the standards. It's pretty common to say, 10% of all units above a certain size of project are required to be maintained at affordability of 80% of area median income or something. We can set the standards, we can set the numbers. None of those are necessarily prescribed in state law. We can do what fits right with Shelton. And there's ways that other jurisdictions have gotten around kind of like the taking issue of, requiring a set aside affordable housing unit. It's by giving a bonus affordable unit. So if a project was coming in at 10 units and that was all they were going to build and they were required to set aside one, you give them a bonus unit in exchange for building the affordable. So now they're building 11, which makes it a slightly larger project, but we've gotten the benefit. We haven't taken anything from the developer. The developer actually makes more money usually by doing this. It's been generally seen as a win-win-win. And when I was working in Redmond, we used this program, our mandatory inclusionary, very extensively. We built probably thousands of affordable units as all of the development was hitting downtown Redmond. So
Thank you. Anyone have any questions, comments for Jay?
I have another question.
Sure.
Back to the beginning where we talked about public infrastructure and then private development. It's kind of, they go together, don't they?
They do, but it is a chicken and an egg process. And so if we don't have the development where we can't really pay for a lot of the infrastructure we want because we want the developers to pay for that infrastructure. However, if the infrastructure isn't here, we can't attract the developers because there's so much uncertainty. For example, if they have to build a water reservoir and pressure zone improvements and all of this stuff before they can even break ground on their project, that's a huge investment. And given economic turmoil, given market conditions and volatility and financing problems and all kinds of stuff, that may not be something that they're willing to bite off. So in the kind of the age old chicken and egg thing, I prefer to, where we can, let's just be the chicken and we'll lay an egg. Like we will build the infrastructure to attract the kind of development that our city wants to see. At the level that we can. I know financially it can be difficult to do so, but I consider it more like an investment in the future of your community, because without making those big infrastructure investments, it's really, really hard to get somebody to put their millions of their own dollars in if they can't trust that the community is behind it.
Well, we tried that for a developer and it hasn't panned out. If you build it, they will come, and they didn't.
Yeah, you can secure things with development agreements. I'm not saying anybody did anything wrong or whatnot. There's ways I think it can definitely be done better. And fortunately, at least I have experience with some of those things. So during my tenure, I'll do the best I can to make sure that those things are moving kind of as parallel as they can. But yeah, it's challenging. You don't want to build a bunch of infrastructure that nobody ever uses. But also, if you don't build it, they won't come. That's just, unless you have, Microsoft in your backyard or SpaceX in your backyard or some huge reason for people to be there. Like it's not a low hanging fruit. It's very, very difficult for them. So
we do the public infrastructure for a big project, but then the private development can come in and use that also?
Correct. So when they come in, they pay the general facilities charges. And when they pay those GFCs, assuming that we've right-sized our general facilities charges, that basically replenishes the funds that we expended to build that development or the infrastructure. And so let's say it costs us the equivalent of $10,000 to build a new water tank for a neighborhood. And then when they come in, they pay that $10,000 per unit in GFCs. It's a wash for the city. We didn't lose money on the deal. We broke even or maybe made money on the deal.
When all things are zeros to that water tank.
What was that?
You need to add a bunch of zeros.
I was spitballing.
I'll take it.
I'll take the $10,000 water tank.
That was not a bid.
Sold.
So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity.
Kind of a circle, isn't it?
It is, and you have to decide if you're willing to take the risk to inject money into the circle. Otherwise, it stops spinning. But if you make the right investments, it just spins and speeds up.
Okay. Thank
It's
you.
also a big part of the comp plan is deciding what type of uses you want in what area. And that dictates what type of infrastructure you need to build to attract those investments.
All right. Thank you.
just looking forward to seeing the process get started. Your comments on Friday were well taken, you know, the visioning piece, you know, you just said it now, investing in the future of our community. I think that's the conversation that more than anything, is gonna be the good conversations to have, just because, you know, we hear a lot and we talk a lot about code and permitting timelines and complaints around all of that. But it's been like almost 5 years and we haven't had any real conversation around the vision. And I'm looking forward to having those discussions and making smart investments with our money, not just making haphazard investments. So yeah, I'm looking forward to having that conversation. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
I look forward to your participation too. This is, you know, it's a community process, but it's very much going to be led by the folks sitting at this table over the next 2 years. And so, you know, your energy is going to be critical in moving this forward. And, you know, I know the citizens of our community are not typically like flush with wealth and really excited to give their money to the government. But, you know, if we can show that the rising tide will raise all ships, you know, and I think that we can really make a compelling story of why the economic development is going to be a stimulus to this community instead of a cost.
Yeah.
And it'll benefit people instead of, you know, just being a waste. We do it right though, and we do it smart. We do it methodically, and we do it with lots and lots of data. And, you know, it can be an emotional issue. I mean, there's going to be people who want to see things change in a certain way or not change at all, or, you know, people who don't want to spend another dime, people who want to see that investment. It's going to be, you know, a lot of community voices, but, you know, having you folks help with the tenor of that is going to be absolutely essential. And I look really forward to working with you on this.
I definitely love the idea of downtown multi-units and density down there and getting people walking the streets and stuff and using our parks and. Yep. We talk about raising the limit of the buildings. The county raised theirs to 55.
We can talk about all of those pieces, and kind of the policy statement would be something along the lines of, you know, increase opportunities for a more walkable and friendly downtown, something like that, right? And then the way that we go about doing the code development is, well, how do we do that? We move buildings closer to the street like they are on the south side of Railroad. We have a little bit wider sidewalks. We require awnings. We raise the height limit so you create the population density that will get you to achieve that policy. That's kind of what Jay was mentioning when we take your policy guidance, translate it into code requirements, and then do the best we can to make sure that the outcome that is produced by those code requirements meets your policy outcomes. If it doesn't, we come back and we relook at it and see what we can tweak.
That's good. Any other questions for Jay or Jeff? No?
good stuff.
Council have any new items for discussion? Then this meeting is adjourned at 6:37 PM.